Girls who have rejected people, what's the worst way someone has taken it? Story 1. He sent me an email with a 3-page essay attached. It was written entirely in third person, recounting his first rejection by a girl named Tanya at the age of 16. There were a lot of solitary beach walks, she's the perfect girl talk, and not taking no for an answer, and the story eventually ends with him drinking antifreeze, slipping into a coma, hospitalized, and eventually recuperating. Only to tell poor Tanya that she could avoid his and his parents' pain by agreeing to date him. The email said, "So you know what you're getting into." I was 19 and did not see this extreme level of crazy coming, but knew I needed to really make how I felt clear. I immediately called him to reiterate that I do not want to be with him, I no longer want to be friends with him, and if he contacted me again, I would change my number. I let a friend of his know what was going on. 5 days later, he called from a different number to tell me he was out in the country with a gun to his head, and if I didn't agree to be with him, then and there, he was pulling the trigger. I lied and convinced him I had to leave because I had a family emergency, aunt sick in the hospital, but we would talk the next day. Had a mutual friend call him and report back as he suspected he was full of crap. Sure enough, I was right. He was totally fine. He called the next day with the most sing-song creepy serial killer tone, said, "You think you're so nice. What type of crappy human being doesn't agree to what someone needs when they tell you they're going to kill themselves? You piece of crap." I lost the plot. Told him I'm changing my numbers, and the next time he contacts me, it will be the police involved. He just laughed the whole time and told me he hopes I die alone, like I deserve. Radio silence for 6 years, until I'm getting married. I have an email from him. "Hey, wow, it's been a while. How are you? Would be so great to catch up sometime." Freaking psychotic butthole. Obviously, I never replied and changed my email again. I'm going to make a prediction right off the bat that there will be a lot of, quote, nice guy stories in here, and this is the worst type of nice guy behavior. I honestly don't know what would be worse, simply lying about the intent to harm yourself as a manipulation tactic, or actually doing it so the other person will have to feel guilty. It's a terrible thing to do either way. No one should ever have to feel guilty for not returning your affections. There are billions of women in the world. You'll get a lot farther simply looking for one who actually likes you instead of going to these insane lengths to harass one who doesn't. Story 2. Back in high school, he pretended to want the same friendship I was looking for. He ended up locking me in his room, threw my phone out of reach, and assaulted me until I worked my way free. As I sat in my car, he casually walked out, handed me my phone, telling me he'll text me later, and I got to learn to live with him in classes, while he acted like nothing ever happened. I expected this to get buried, but I wanted to clear up what happened afterwards. I didn't report him because I considered him such a good friend for a considerably long time. The experience, luckily, did not amount to grape, which is why I'm using the term assaults. At the time, I wasn't entirely sure it was assaults. Things like, maybe I asked for it, or I'm just overreacting, ran through my mind. It was a year afterward when I finally came to the realization, and by that time, I both didn't care and, sorry to say this, didn't want to see a kid who was successful in college and in a healthy long-term relationship be brought down by rumors. Not what I want to call it, but what a majority of the world would today. This isn't a great answer, but it's the only answer I have for my inaction. Story 3. He shoved me into a wall and busted my head open. I was taking a break at work behind the building, listening to music and enjoying the breeze, and a coworker I constantly tried to avoid because he was a creep started asking me out. I'd already been irritated because of crappy customers and the overbearing heat inside, so instead of the usual brush-off reply, I snapped at him and made it clear I was in no way interested, had a boyfriend whom I loved, and that he needed to get the F out of my personal space. I went to walk away, and he grabbed my arm to twist me around, trying to back me against the wall. And when I managed to finally rip my arm away and press him back to get off me, he got ticked off and shoved me. Back of my head hit the wall, split open about 1.5 inches, bled a lot and had to get about 7 stitches. He got fired and also arrested for assaults. He tried to say I had hit him first, but luckily there was a camera around back that caught the whole thing. Story 4. My sister got followed home by a dude she rejected. He went up to the house and started talking to her kids and telling them he was their new dad. Luckily, real dad came out in his police attire. Put a real quick end to that. Want to clear up some confusion. My sister and the real dad are married, not divorced or anything. The guy followed her home from the hospital she was at where he was a patient under her care. He made a move on her. She said no. There was no relationship between them besides nurse/patient. Well, maybe not in his eyes. I refer to my brother-in-law as my brother, mostly because I'm too lazy to type it out, but also because he's been in my life since I was a little kid. Brother was not threatening the man as a cop, but instead as a father. He just happened to be getting ready to leave for work at the same time. The guy ended up getting transferred to another hospital to be closer to his family after complications from overdosing. Okay, so my prediction seems to have been wrong. These aren't nice guy stories at all. They're just stories about men who are too psycho to even bother hiding it. But what might also bug me more is the implication in this OP's edit that some commenters were criticizing the husband for answering the door in his police uniform. Why does it matter if he was leaving for work or not? I know it's the trend to hate cops nowadays, to the point I've seen movies like Zootopia and Sonic the Hedgehog called Copaganda for featuring police who aren't pure evil, but are we really going to lean so hard into it that we're willing to start defending a man who followed a woman home and engaged her children? If there's ever been a decent place to draw the line, I say we draw it here. Story 5. I had actually heard of a lot of people doing this before, but I'd never had it happen to me, and when it did, it was completely devastating. He told me I had to go out with him or he would hurt himself. He then said goodbye, very convincingly and emotionally, and turned his phone off / stopped picking up or answering any texts. I knew him from when we went to high school together, and so I actually had his best mates and his dad's phone numbers. I phoned them and sent the screenshots of the messages to them, absolutely hysterical and worrying that he was in a gutter somewhere. However, it was very quickly discovered by his livid father that he was actually around a mate smoking weed, and he thought this would at least get him a pity shag. What a complete and utter twat. Story 6. I'd gone out with a guy once that I'd met through a dating site, and we just didn't click. I told him exactly that, was very respectful of his feelings, and wished him the best. He was not receptive at all. He called me a horse, told me that he was going to find where I lived, and pushed me into oncoming traffic. Really awful things. He wouldn't stop texting me horrible stuff about how I was a gigantic witch, a total chunt for leading him on, and that he hoped that someone raped me. I blocked his number, which thankfully stopped the messages, reported him on the dating app, and thankfully never heard from him again. It was legit one of the scariest freaking things. Dude was unhinged. Story 7. When I was a nanny, I was walking around with the baby in the pram, and we visited a bookstore. A man in there started talking to me and then asked me out. Very kindly, keeping my father's advice in mind about being kind when I have to reject a man. When they asked me out, I said that was a nice offer, but my boyfriend might not be too keen on it. His response to that was to lean in and try and kiss me. I told him to get the F off me. He then exploded with rage and started screaming in my face. I was saved by the bookstore employee. The man stormed out of the shop. I spent the next few hours shaking like a leaf. What a champion. It's the bookstore setting that does it for me. I know the guys in these stores more than likely have a couple of mental health issues for the most part, but I'm just trying to get in the head of the guy who goes to a bookstore, sees a woman with a baby that for all he knows might be hers, and decides this is the day he's not taking no for an answer. I can't imagine most women go to the bookstore with or without a baby in tow, thinking this is the day I'm going to make out with a stranger. Feel free to correct me if I have that wrong, but I really don't feel like I do. Story 8. In high school, I turned the guy down, so he went around spreading rumors that he tried to F me, but my hoo-ha was deformed and practically closed up. He spent the rest of the year talking crap about how nasty I was, unclean, unshaven, etc. Sometime about 5 years ago, he tried to add me on Facebook, and I blocked him. Frick that guy. I spent months trying to convince people I knew how to wash my butthole. Story 9. Guy asked me out during an Uber pool ride. I told him I wasn't interested, and he started moving closer and asking me why I wasn't interested and what was wrong with him. It was uncomfortable to say the least. My Uber driver, for some reason, thought it was hilarious to see me pressed against the door to try and get away from this random guy invading my personal space. Story 10. He was 15 at the time, and although the rejection happened over the phone, He was so irate that he illegally drove a car to the nearest place he knew to where my house was. I'd once told him I lived near the hospital, and waited there, demanding I give him more accurate directions to my house. In retrospect, I probably should have been more terrified than I was. In a weird way, you almost have to admire the moxie it takes to straight up tell a girl you intend to stalk her and ask her for more details so you can do it effectively. I mean, the guy's creepy for sure, and he hopefully grew out of that as he got older and got more accustomed to rejection, which I'm just assuming is something he wound up experiencing a lot. But he's almost creepy in the same way as Jake Gyllenhaal from Nightcrawler. He's a creep who knows what he wants. Get rid of the first part, and the second part is a formula for success. Story 11. I turned down a guy that was known for being the popular guy, and I thought he was a bit of a jerkhead. When he tried to kiss me, I turned my head the other way, said I wasn't interested, and walked off. He grabbed my hand, spat in my face, and said I missed the best opportunity in my life, and the only reason he tried to kiss me was because he pitied me. Story 12. I also once had a guy send me hundreds of text messages calling me all kinds of names, cursing me out and threatening me because I didn't do it with him after our entirely lackluster first and last date. I didn't even bother reading beyond the first 50. Just let him go on until I blocked and deleted him. Still, it was nuts. Story 13. We went on one date, and I declined a second. A couple of days after that, he called me and told me what I had been wearing that day. This went on for a couple of months. I'd literally never see him, but at least 3 times a week, he'd know exactly what I wore. Okay, I know some people probably didn't like the Nightcrawler joke, but to clarify, I only felt comfortable making that joke because the guy's threat had no real legs under it. This is different. This is legitimately terrifying. And on top of that, this is a stalker who doesn't even know what he wants. I mean, did he think this was going to win her over? Did he just want to scare her? It's not even just crazy, it's pointless. It does nothing but waste your time and potentially land you in legal trouble. Moving on is objectively better for everyone involved. Story 14. This is a slightly different take, but I turned a guy down for a date, and he then posted a long snap story about how much he loves his wife that he neglected to mention all that time. Cheaters will often do stuff like that when they feel guilty for trying to cheat. Story 15. He broke into my house and chased me into my bedroom, then spent 10 minutes shouting through my locked bedroom door that I should come out and have a reasonable conversation with him, adult to adults. Yes, if I'm going to have a reasonable conversation with anyone, it's going to be the guy who breaks into my house. I haven't quite been there, but I did have a guy break in through my back door. When I caught him poking around my TV area, he accused me of stealing his wallet. Apparently, the one thing people who break into houses have in common is that they enjoy gaslighting more than they excel at it. Story 16. By getting nudes from another girl, cropping her face out, and showing them to everybody, saying it was me. Thankfully, no one has threatened my life. Story 17. Called me an ugly horse and said no one would ever want to smurf me. He didn't like when I asked how I could both be unsmurfable and a horse. Story 18. He stopped his car in the middle of an intersection and just kept slamming his fist on the steering wheel. Story 19. He called me roofie bait and then followed me around campus for a couple months. Story 20. He told me he had considered trying to get me pregnant so I would have to marry him. Safe to say, you and the hypothetical child both dodged a bullet there. No one with that particular level of emotional maturity would likely make a much better father than they would a husband. Also, I'm not even sure that plan is legal, so I can't imagine why the guy would openly admit to it, but it doesn't sound like most of the guys in this thread are too big on logic, so maybe I shouldn't be a bit surprised. Please leave your stories in the comments. I'd love to make a video of them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.